October 15, 1943. Over Rabaul, New Britain, Lieutenant Colonel Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, Japan's legendary ace with over 80 kills, banked his zero hard left, diving toward what should have been easy prey, American fighters, scattered and alone deep in Japanese airspace. For 2 years, such encounters had been suicide for Allied pilots. The Zero ruled these skies. Its unmatched agility and 1,000-mile range had made it untouchable. Until now, through his canopy, Nishizawa watched in disbelief as the twin-engine American aircraft, what the Japanese mockingly called two planes joined together, didn't break away. Instead, it climbed. The P-38 Lightning surged upward in a maneuver that shattered every assumption Japanese doctrine held to be true. 400 miles per hour in a dive, 41,000 feet of operational ceiling, firepower that could tear a Zero apart in seconds. Across the Pacific, pilots who had once dominated the heavens were discovering a terrifying new truth. The Lightning wasn't just another fighter. It was hunting them in places they once considered safe. The twin-tailed nightmare had arrived, and it would make Japanese pilots fear American engineering more than anything else in the war. Major Thomas Maguire pulled his P-38 Lightning into a steep banking turn at 28,000 feet. Twin Allison engines thrumming with lethal precision as he scanned the sky above WWII. Below, the Japanese airfield complex sprawled across the New Guinea coast like a spider's web of concrete and steel, littered with the silhouettes of Mitsubishi Zeros. It was March 15, 1944. Hunting season had begun. The transformation from desperate defense to offensive dominance hadn't been instant. Just 18 months earlier, Allied pilots in the Pacific had been flying virtual death traps against the Zero's unmatched superiority. The Grumman F-4F Wildcat, crawling at 3D18 mph with a miserable climb rate, had been butchered by Japanese aces who could outfly, outclimb, and outturn anything America fielded. The Zero's near 1,000-mile combat radius let it strike deep into Allied territory and return home with ease, while U.S. fighters struggled to escort bombers even short distances. But the P-38 Lightning changed that, and the numbers told a story Japan's high command didn't want to face. The Zero climbed at 2,300 feet per minute. The Lightning 2,800, the Zero's top speed, 332 tau mph. The Lightning's 414, and while the Zero carried two 20mm cannons and a pair of machine guns, the Lightning's nose mounted 450 caliber, Brownings and a 20mm cannon, a concentrated cone of fire capable of disintegrating any target in a 2-second burst. Wing Commander Naoto Fuji had been among the first to meet this new terror over Bougainville in December 1943. On dawn patrol, Fuji spotted what looked like unprotected American bombers escorted by unfamiliar twin-engine fighters. Doctrine dictated ignoring the escorts and diving on the bombers. Using superior dive speed, the Zeros could carve through the formation before the Americans could react. Fuji led his men down from 30,000 feet, confident in another effortless kill. But the Lightnings didn't scatter. They turned straight into the attack, charging head-on, in defiance of every aerial combat principle the Japanese had ever learned. In Pacific air duels, fighters danced for position, avoiding frontal engagements that risked mutual destruction. The Lightning pilots embraced them. Fuji soon saw why. The Lightning's concentrated nose guns meant even a moment's alignment was deadly, while the Zero's wing-mounted weapons demanded precise deflection shooting. Fuji's wingman, Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto, lasted barely 3 seconds in his first encounter. The American pilot, later identified as Captain Charles McDonald of the 475th Fighter Group, opened fire from 800 yards. His tracers stitching upward into the Zero as the aircraft closed at over 700 milliliters combined. The Lightning's cannon shells shredded the Zero's fragile frame like a saw through bamboo, turning it into a flaming wreck that vanished into the jungle below. The psychological shock was instant and devastating. Japanese pilots who had ruled the Pacific skies since Pearl Harbor were suddenly prey. The Lightning's twin-engine reliability meant mechanical failures rarely ended missions, while the Zero's single-engine design became a fatal weakness when hit. Even worse, the Lightning's 1,100-mile range with drop tanks let it strike airfields deep inside Japanese-held territory, places once thought untouchable. Lieutenant Colonel Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, Japan's top ace, learned this firsthand over Rabaul in early 1944. His mastery of the Zero's unmatched. Maneuverability had built his legend, winning turning fights by slipping inside his enemy's arc, but against the Lightning. Those tactics meant nothing. Against the Lightning, this tactic became a death sentence. American pilots refused to engage in traditional dogfights, instead exploiting their superior speed and climb rate to strike from above, unleash a devastating burst, and disappear before the Zeros could react. Captain Charles MacDonald, flying as Maguire's wingman, had perfected what Americans called boom and zoom tactics, designed specifically to counter the Zero's legendary agility. Rather than trying to outturn the nimble Japanese fighter, Lightning pilots would dive from altitude, fire at blistering speed, and climb away using their superior power-to-weight advantage. The Zero pilot faced two grim choices: try to follow the climbing Lightning and stall in the thin air above 30,000 feet, or stay low and wait helplessly for the next attack. The frustration among Japanese pilots was overwhelming. Squadron leader Saburo Sakai, veteran of Pearl Harbor and the early Pacific campaigns, described the Lightning as two fighters welded together by American engineers who knew nothing of air combat, but somehow built a monster. His words were both mistaken and prophetic. The Lightning's unorthodox twin-engine, twin-boom configuration wasn't born of ignorance. It was the result of deliberate design that prioritized concentrated firepower, pilot safety, and long-range flexibility over traditional ideas of beauty. The technical data told the story of Japan's growing despair. By the spring of 1944, American factories were rolling out over 300 Lightnings per month, while Japanese production barely replaced combat losses. Each new Lightning from Lockheed's Burbank assembly line carried technologies the Japanese could scarcely imagine. Oxygen systems that let pilots fight comfortably above 40,000 feet, turbo-supercharged engines that maintained power in the thin stratosphere, and radios capable of clear communication across hundreds of miles. Yet beyond the machines themselves, the Lightning's psychological dominance was even more crushing. Pilots who once took off with confidence now searched the skies nervously for the distinctive twin-tail silhouette that spelled death from above. The Lightning's reach across the Pacific meant no Japanese airfield, no matter how remote, was safe. This constant pressure eroded already exhausted air crews who had endured 2 relentless years of combat. The numbers told a story no propaganda could conceal. In the first quarter of 1944, Lightning pilots claimed over 400 Japanese aircraft destroyed for fewer than 60 losses, a kill ratio unimaginable only 2 years before. Worse, most of the downed Japanese planes had carried veteran aces whose skill had long sustained Japan's aerial dominance. Lieutenant Colonel Hiroyoshi Nishizawa stood before the tactical board inside the Rabaul operations bunker, his worn hands tracing red pins, marking yet another Lightning strike. June 23, 1944. In the past 72 hours, American P-38s had obliterated 18 Japanese aircraft on the ground at 3 separate airfields, penetrating nearly 400 miles into Japanese-held territory and returning without a single loss. The standard countermeasure, scrambling interceptors to repel the attackers, had become a futile exercise that only added more red markers to the board. The frustration that had simmered among Japan's fighter pilots since the Lightning's arrival was now boiling into fury. Captain Tetsuzo Iwamoto, one of Japan's most celebrated aces with over 60 kills, slammed his fist on the briefing table as he addressed his men. The Lightnings weren't merely winning dogfights, they were dismantling Japan's entire aerial doctrine. For 3 years, Japanese strategy had depended on the Zero's superior agility and range to dominate vast stretches of Pacific airspace. Now the Americans were using the Lightning's even greater range, speed and firepower to hunt Japanese aircraft inside their own defensive ring. The reforms that followed exposed Japan's desperation. Traditional doctrine prized individual skill and maneuverability. Pilots trained to exploit the Zero's tight turns in single combat. Against the Lightning, those instincts were suicidal. Japanese squadrons were forced into defensive formations they had never practiced, flying in tight, rigid groups that negated the Zero's advantages in a futile attempt at mutual protection. Saburo. Sakai proposed the most radical shift of all. Mass formations of 12 to 16 Zeros attacking in coordinated waves. The concept was logical. Overwhelm the Lightning with sheer numbers, forcing it into turning engagements where the Zero's agility might still count. In practice, it was disastrous. Those massed groups became perfect targets for Lightning pilots, who could strike from high altitude and long range, picking them apart before the Zeros even knew they were under attack. The Lightning's nose-mounted guns allowed its pilots to slash through enemy formations with lethal precision, unleash devastating bursts, and climb away before Japanese pilots could even react. The first true test of these new tactics came over Hollandia in July 1944, when Nishizawa personally led 24 Zeros in a coordinated attack against 12 P-38 Lightnings, escorting a group of B-25 bombers. The Japanese approached from the sun in flawless formation, a textbook assault that would have overwhelmed any previous American fighter. But Major Thomas Maguire, commanding the Lightning escort, broke every rule of air combat. Rather than holding defensive positions around the bombers, he ordered his men to abandon formation and strike the Zeros head-on. The battle lasted just 11 minutes. When it ended, 14 Japanese aircraft had been destroyed, including 2 flown by aces with over 40 kills, while the Americans lost a single Lightning to a lucky 20mm hit. The downed pilot bailed out safely and was rescued within hours. The message was clear. Even perfect Japanese formations were helpless against Lightning pilots who refused to fight by the old rules. Captain Tetsuzo Iwamoto's growing anger reached its breaking point a few weeks later. During a patrol over WWII on August 5, 1944, flying at 25,000 feet with 8 Zeros in tight defensive formation, he spotted 4 Lightnings approaching from the northeast at long range. Standard Japanese doctrine demanded maintaining altitude to lure the Americans into a turning fight where the Zero's agility might still prevail. But the Lightning pilots had no interest in such duels. They split into 2 pairs, one climbing to 32,000 feet, the other diving to 18,000, creating a deadly vertical trap. Any Zero that climbed toward the upper element would expose its flank to the lower pair. Iwamoto suddenly found himself playing 3-dimensional chess with no winning move. When he climbed to strike, the lower Lightnings pounced on his wingman. When he descended to defend, the higher pair swooped down with annihilating precision. The psychological collapse among Japanese pilots was immediate. Some resorted to desperate improvisations, carrying extra ammunition at the cost of fuel, cutting their range to barely 600 miles in the hope of landing a lucky hit during fleeting encounters. Others stripped away armor and self-sealing tanks, gambling that a few extra knots of speed might let them escape. These modifications only made their aircraft more fragile, offering no real advantage against the Lightning's concentrated firepower. Wing Commander Naoto Fuji devised what became known as the kamikaze turn, a last-ditch defensive maneuver where Zero pilots pulled maximum Gs in an ultra-tight loop, hoping to make the Lightning overshoot or stall. The tactic succeeded only once, when an inexperienced American pilot attempted to follow through a steep climbing turn at 38,000 feet and stalled out. Japanese intelligence treated the rare incident as a great victory, distributing detailed reports as if a new countermeasure had been found. In truth, it was an isolated fluke amid a sea of defeats. By September 1944, Japan's aviation industry was collapsing. Monthly fighter production had fallen below 800, while combat losses outpaced replacements by nearly 3-1. The Lightning's deep penetration range meant even training airfields, once considered safe, were now under constant attack. New Japanese pilots, arriving with barely 200 flight hours, faced American veterans boasting over 500 hours, much of it in real combat, honed through 18 months of continuous operations. Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto, one of the few to survive multiple encounters with the P-38, captured the hopelessness in his diary. The twin-tailed demon is everywhere. We take off at dawn and already it waits above us. We climb to 30,000 feet and it climbs higher. We dive to sea level and it follows, its engines screaming like angry ghosts. There is no altitude safe from it, no distance its guns cannot reach. The Lightning's unmatched flexibility only deepened Japan's crisis. While Zero pilots were bound by strict doctrine and fuel limitations, Lightning squadrons adapted fluidly, exploiting every weakness in Japanese formations. Twin-engine reliability meant mechanical issues rarely ended missions, and long-range endurance allowed American pilots to linger for hours above enemy territory, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Captain Charles MacDonald's 433rd Fighter Squadron perfected the deadly art of the fighter sweep, long-range missions designed to annihilate Japanese aircraft over their own airfields. These operations defied every convention of aerial warfare, abandoning bomber protection in favor of pure offensive pursuit. Yet with the Lightning's extraordinary blend of range, speed, and concentrated firepower, such missions became not just possible, they became devastatingly routine. Japanese pilots now found themselves under attack at every stage of flight, while taxiing for takeoff, during landing approaches, and even as their aircraft sat on the ground, undergoing maintenance. The cumulative effect was nothing short of catastrophic: the total collapse of Japanese air superiority in the Central Pacific. By October 1944, every Japanese mission was planned with the grim expectation of encountering Lightnings, and strategy had shifted from achieving objectives to simply surviving. The confident aviators, who once ruled Pacific skies since Pearl Harbor, had been reduced to exhausted men flying outdated machines against an enemy they could neither catch nor escape. Major Thomas Maguire eased his P-38 Lightning back to cruising speed as he crossed the international dateline at 35,000 feet, leading a formation of 16 aircraft on the longest fighter mission yet attempted in the Pacific. It was October 14, 1944. Their target lay 850 miles ahead, the heavily fortified Japanese airfields around Manila, where intelligence reported more than 200 enemy aircraft massed for a final desperate defense of the Philippines. The mission embodied everything the Japanese feared most about the Lightning's tactical evolution. What had begun as a defensive escort fighter was now a long-range strategic weapon, capable of striking deep into enemy territory and annihilating targets far beyond the reach of any single-engine aircraft. The P-38's ability to carry 2 1,000-pound bombs without sacrificing air-to-air capability allowed it to serve as bomber, interceptor, and reconnaissance platform all at once, roles Japanese doctrine insisted required entirely separate aircraft. Lieutenant Colonel William Harris had spent months refining the operational system that made these missions feasible. His analysis of combat data revealed a simple truth: Japanese pilots were most vulnerable during takeoff and landing when their aircraft were slow, exposed, and unable to maneuver effectively. Traditional fighter tactics focused on engagements at altitude, but Harris recognized that the Lightning's twin engines, heavy firepower, and extraordinary range made it the perfect weapon to exploit these weaknesses. The tactical breakthrough came during a September mission over Balikpapan, when Captain Charles MacDonald's squadron arrived over a Japanese base just as a formation of Zeros began their landing approach. Rather than waiting for them to touch down, MacDonald ordered his pilots to attack immediately. The result was devastating. Zeros caught in landing configuration, gear down, flaps extended, engines throttled back, were helpless. 16 Japanese aircraft were destroyed in under 5 minutes without a single American loss. The success forced a complete rethinking of lightning operations across the Pacific. No longer would they simply patrol and react. Missions were now timed to exploit Japanese routines, identified through radio intercepts and reconnaissance data. If a Japanese unit launched dawn patrols, lightning formations would arrive precisely when those aircraft were either taking off or returning, low on fuel and exhausted. Wing Commander Naoto Fuji experienced this new nightmare firsthand over Leyte Gulf in late October. His formation of 12 Zeros had completed a 3-hour patrol and was returning to Tacloban when they spotted what appeared to be a lone lightning flying low along the coastline. Doctrine dictated an immediate attack, but Fuji hesitated, a caution born of bitter experience. His instincts proved correct. As his squadron turned to engage, the solitary lightning suddenly climbed at full power, revealing 16 more P-38s hidden at wavetop level. Masked from radar by the coastal terrain, what followed was a slaughter. The American pilots had clearly studied Japanese return protocols and positioned themselves to strike at the exact moment of maximum vulnerability. The Zeros, running on near-empty fuel tanks and flown by weary pilots, were no match for fresh American flyers loaded with ammunition and fuel. The engagement showcased the Lightning's transformation from defensive escort to relentless predator. Maguire's own tactics epitomized this new breed of warfare. He no longer sought dogfights where agility decided victory. Instead, he used intelligence and timing to ensure his enemies were defeated before combat even began. His October mission to Manila represented the ultimate realization of this doctrine, a deep penetration raid timed to coincide with Japanese morning launch cycles, when dozens of planes were exposed on runways or trapped in traffic patterns. The technical innovations that enabled such missions underscored America's overwhelming industrial and engineering edge, an advantage that no amount of courage or sacrifice could overcome. Lightning aircraft assigned to extended-range missions carried specially designed drop tanks that increased total fuel capacity to over 900 gallons per engine, allowing combat operations at distances far beyond the reach of most Japanese bombers. More crucially, these tanks were engineered to detach cleanly once empty, ensuring the Lightning retained its full maneuverability and combat performance rather than being slowed by dead weight. Japanese efforts to counter these tactics only exposed their mounting desperation. Some commanders ordered constant combat air patrols over their own bases, hoping to intercept Lightning formations before they struck grounded aircraft. The results were disastrous. The strategy drained precious fuel, exhausted pilots, and offered little protection. The Lightning's superior speed and range allowed American pilots to dictate every engagement, striking outlying fields, while Japanese interceptors circled uselessly over primary installations. Lieutenant Colonel Hiroshi Nishizawa's final mission demonstrated the futility of Japan's defense against these evolved tactics. Leading 8 Zeros in a patrol over Clark Field near Manila, Nishizawa spotted Maguire's formation approaching from the southeast at 28,000 feet. His instinct was to climb and engage, but hard-earned experience warned him Lightning pilots were rarely where they appeared. While his attention fixed on the high-altitude threat, 4 additional Lightnings swept in at treetop level, destroying 3 Zeros on the runway before the Japanese could respond. The psychological toll of such defeats extended far beyond the tactical level. Pilots, who had once believed themselves superior to Western aviators, now faced an enemy who combined technological dominance with scientific precision. The Lightning embodied everything Japanese military culture struggled to comprehend: the supremacy of engineering over instinct, organization over courage, and analysis over tradition. Captain MacDonald's after-action reports from this period revealed just how refined American lightning warfare had become. His squadron's October operations often lasted 8 hours, spanning more than 1,500 miles, with multiple engagements as formations hunted Japanese aircraft across enormous distances. Such missions were made possible by the P-38's twin-engine reliability, which allowed damaged aircraft to return home, and by its concentrated firepower, which ensured that even brief encounters were decisively one-sided. By late 1944, operational data painted an unmistakable picture of total American air supremacy. Japanese aircraft losses exceeded replacements by a ratio of 5-to-1, while attrition among veteran pilots crippled Japan's ability to train new flyers. Rookie aviators now survived an average of fewer than 10 missions, while Lightning pilots routinely completed 100-mission tours with aircraft. Loss rates below 5%. The Lightning's evolution from a high-altitude interceptor into the Pacific's dominant air supremacy weapon was complete. Japanese aviators who had once ruled the skies now scanned the horizon in fear of the twin-boom silhouette that heralded defeat. Lieutenant Colonel Hiroyoshi Nishizawa sat motionless in his Zero at Mabalacat Airfield in the Philippines, watching his fuel gauge drift toward empty as ground crews scrambled to find enough gasoline for a morning patrol. It was January 7, 1945. Japan's defeat in the Pacific was no longer theoretical. It was a reality written in the collapse of its logistics. The Americans had not merely outfought the Japanese. They had dismantled the very systems that sustained them. P-38 Lightnings had destroyed depots, convoys, and transport links with relentless precision, turning once proud Zeros into grounded relics. The change was both mechanical and psychological. Where Japanese pilots had once taken off brimming with confidence in their aircraft and training, they now departed with half-filled tanks, limited ammunition, and the grim awareness that lightning formations were waiting. Wing Commander Naoto Fuji's December 1944 combat logs told the same story in numbers. His squadron, which had fielded 42 aircraft in September, now listed only 9 flyable Zeros. Replacement pilots and aircraft had slowed to a trickle, leaving his unit barely operational. In desperation, Japan's high command resorted to reckless new doctrines that discarded decades of air combat wisdom. The traditional emphasis on agility and pilot skill had been rendered irrelevant, neutralized by an opponent who fought with overwhelming range. Power and precision, Lightning pilots refused to engage in turning dogfights, forcing Japanese commanders to abandon traditional air combat doctrine. In desperation, they adopted massed formation assaults, committing every available aircraft to coordinated attacks meant to overwhelm American defenses through sheer numbers rather than tactical skill. The first test of this strategy came over Lingayen Gulf on January 9th. When 63 Japanese aircraft, every operational Zero, Oscar, and Tony in northern Luzon, launched a single massive strike against the American invasion fleet. It was the largest Japanese air operation in months, carefully planned to exploit what intelligence suggested was a brief gap in lightning coverage. But Major Thomas Maguire's 14th Fighter Group intercepted the attackers 90 miles from their target, leading 32 P-38s into what became the largest aerial battle of the Pacific. War's final stage, the fight lasted 47 minutes and proved beyond doubt that numbers could not overcome the Lightning's unmatched blend of speed, firepower, and coordination. Japanese aircraft, packed tightly in defensive formations intended to protect one another, became easy prey when attacked from multiple directions. The concentrated fields of fire that were supposed to make these formations formidable instead became deadly traps. Once American pilots struck from ranges the Zero's guns could not reach. Captain Charles MacDonald, flying as Maguire's wingman, later described the engagement as like shooting fish in a barrel with a 12-gauge. His combat report detailed how Lightning pilots used their altitude advantage to dive, strike, and then climb away untouched, each pass claiming several Japanese planes before the Americans reformed for another attack. Eventually, formation discipline collapsed entirely as surviving Japanese pilots broke away in chaotic attempts to flee, exposing themselves to further destruction. The results were devastating. 51 Japanese aircraft were confirmed destroyed, 8 more probably destroyed, and only 4 managed to limp back to base. Lightning losses totaled just 3 aircraft, all to anti-aircraft fire during low-level strafing, not air-to-air combat. Yet even more crippling than the material losses was the elimination of Japan's few remaining veteran pilots, men whose experience had anchored their nation's air power since Pearl Harbor. Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto, one of only 6 survivors, later described the experience in haunting detail. His Zero was hit during the first American pass, forcing him to glide toward the nearest Japanese-held island. As he descended, he watched helplessly while P-38 formations annihilated his squadron, his group, and finally his entire wing with ruthless precision. To him, it no longer felt like fighting other men, but confronting a machine, a system that transformed aerial warfare into an industrial process of annihilation, the aftermath of the Lingayen Gulf battle marked the end of organized Japanese air resistance in the Philippines. The surviving aircraft were scattered to improvised jungle airstrips, emerging only for isolated kamikaze strikes that sought moral rather than tactical impact. This shift from air combat to suicide attacks was the ultimate acknowledgement that Japan could no longer match the Lightning in conventional warfare. Wing Commander Naoto Fuji's final operational report, dated February 3, 1945, laid bare the collapse in dispassionate language that thinly veiled despair. His remaining pilots averaged fewer than 50 flight hours and had never fought Americans in air-to-air engagements. Their training was rushed, their aircraft patched together from salvaged parts, and every mission was now planned to avoid lightning patrols rather than seek battle. The once proud naval aviators who had ruled the Pacific skies for 3 years were reduced to flying outdated machines in futile gestures of resistance. The Lightning's contribution to this downfall extended far beyond its kill counts. American pilots had dismantled Japan's entire aerial ecosystem, destroying fuel depots, repair shops, training centers, and communications facilities with the same cold precision they applied in combat. Captain MacDonald's February sorties illustrated this relentless approach. His typical mission involved 8 Lightnings, sweeping across Japanese-held islands for 6 to 8 hours, attacking anything that moved and ensuring no rest or recovery for the enemy. The psychological toll was immense. Japanese pilots who once took off with confidence now did so with dread, knowing that somewhere above, the twin-boom silhouette of the Lightning was waiting, faster, higher, and deadlier than anything Japan could put in the air. Japanese pilots faced a growing certainty of technological inferiority that bred quiet defeatism, spreading from individuals to entire units, and eroding the aggressive confidence that had once defined their air force. Major Thomas Maguire's final combat mission on January 7, 1945, symbolized the Lightning's absolute supremacy. Leading 4 aircraft on a routine patrol over Negros Island, he spotted a lone Zero limping home from what appeared to be a failed sortie. Gone were the days of cautious stalking and tactical duels. Maguire simply advanced to attack speed, fired a short burst from his nose-mounted guns, and watched the Zero vanish in a ball of flame. Another casualty of a war already decided. The campaign statistics told the larger story. Between October 1944 and February 1945, Japanese air losses exceeded 1,000 confirmed destroyed, while experienced pilot casualties reached a staggering 93%. Lightning losses totaled just 67, mostly from ground fire or mechanical failures, not aerial combat. The resulting 15-to-1 kill ratio reflected more than battlefield efficiency. It marked the total collapse of Japanese air doctrine before the industrial and technological might of the United States. Wing Commander Naoto Fuji stood beside his grounded Zero at Kanoya Air Base, staring upward at the twin contrails of P-38 Lightnings cruising at 40,000 feet. It was March 15th, 1945. The American aircraft were photographing Kyushu in preparation for invasion, and Japan's defenses were powerless to intervene. The few operational Zeros lacked the oxygen systems and altitude performance needed to intercept them, while the remaining skilled pilots were being conserved for inevitable kamikaze attacks. Fuji's quiet, unmoving stance captured the shift that had overtaken Japanese aviation that winter. A change from fury to acceptance, from defiance to reluctant admiration. Lieutenant Colonel Hiroyoshi Nishizawa had expressed the same sentiment before his death the previous October, calling the Lightning an enemy worthy of our hatred, for it conquered us through engineering, not courage. That grudging respect marked a transformation in mindset that would have been inconceivable at the war's start. Captain Tetsuzo Iwamoto's combat diary charted this evolution with haunting clarity. His early entries from 1943 brimmed with contempt for American flyers and faith in the Zero's unmatched agility. By late 1944, his words had grown analytical, even respectful, noting the Lightning's tactics and superior machinery. His final entry, dated April 3, 1945, read simply, "The Americans built the better airplane. Japan must learn from this if we are to survive the peace." This reckoning carried cultural weight far beyond the cockpit. Japan's national identity had long rested on the conviction that spirit and discipline could overcome material disadvantage, a belief vindicated during its early modernization and military triumphs. But the Lightning's systematic dismantling of Japanese air power refuted that creed, proving that industrial science and mechanical precision could eclipse even the fiercest human will. It forced a generation of pilots to confront a sobering truth. Valor alone could not defeat technology. Major Maguire's own death that same January morning, struck by ground fire during a low-level strafing run, served as a poignant reminder that even mastery of modern warfare carried mortal cost. He had personified the Lightning's ethos, bold, methodical, and ruthlessly effective. His loss underscored that no machine, however advanced, could make its operator invincible. Captain Charles MacDonald, who witnessed the event, later reflected that Maguire's death reminded us we were fighting men, not mechanisms, and that courage was universal across this cruel sky. When word of Maguire's death reached the Japanese, the reaction was unexpectedly subdued. Rather than rejoice at the fall of a formidable foe, many expressed regret that such a skilled adversary had perished to ground fire instead of aerial combat. Squadron leader Saburo Sakai later called Maguire a worthy opponent whose tactics revealed our own flaws better than any training could. That rare moment of professional respect stood in stark contrast to the racial contempt that had defined the war's early years. The lessons drawn from these encounters endured long after the guns fell silent. The technological education Japan received in defeat, through the humbling efficiency of the Lightning, became the foundation of its post-war aviation industry. Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto, one of the few surviving veterans, later observed that the P-38 taught us the future. War belongs not to bravery alone, but to those who master the science that sustains it. Few Japanese aces who survived the war, such as Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto, dedicated extensive time to studying captured Lightning technical manuals and maintenance records. His reports to Japanese aviation engineers stressed the American focus on reliability, standardization, and systematic testing, principles that stood in sharp contrast to Japan's emphasis on pure performance over maintainability. The Lightning's twin-engine configuration, initially dismissed by Japanese designers as wasteful and unnecessarily complex, came to symbolize everything Japan's aviation industry had misunderstood about modern air combat. The redundancy of two engines allowed Lightning pilots to complete missions even after sustaining damage that would have doomed single-engine fighters. More significantly, the aircraft's design philosophy prioritized pilot survival and aircraft recoverability over sheer performance, ensuring that trained aviators could return to battle rather than being lost in unserviceable machines. Captain Charles McDonald's post-war analysis of Lightning operations revealed the systematic mindset that had made American tactics so effective against Japanese pilots schooled in individualistic combat traditions. His squadron's victories stemmed from standardized procedures, rigorous training, and precise mission planning, not from reliance on personal skill or superior aircraft alone. This structured approach marked a profound shift from the heroic, warrior-centered ethos that had long defined aerial combat, the Lightning's final missions over Japan. In the summer of 1945 illustrated the complete reversal of power that had occurred since 1942. American fighters now roamed Japanese skies with the same impunity once enjoyed by Japanese pilots over Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies. For civilians below, the sight of the Lightning's distinctive twin-boom silhouette became a haunting reminder of American technological dominance and Japan's inability to resist it. Wing Commander Fuji's surrender interview with American intelligence in September 1945 offered the clearest Japanese perspective on the Lightning's impact. He concluded that American victory had been secured not through better individual pilots or traditional measures of aircraft performance, but through the disciplined application of industrial engineering to air warfare. The Lightning embodied the triumph of American production methods, maintenance systems, and tactical doctrines that treated aerial combat as a solvable technological equation. Statistics from the war's final months underscored the Lightning's total supremacy. Between January and August 1945, Lightning formations destroyed more than 800 Japanese aircraft, while losing fewer than 40 of their own to all causes, a staggering 20-to-1 kill ratio, the most unbalanced in air combat history. These figures testified not only to the aircraft's technological edge, but to the collapse of Japanese air doctrine in the face of overwhelming American industrial and engineering might. In the war's aftermath, reconciliation between former adversaries grew from shared professional respect rather than ideology. Many Japanese pilots openly admired the Lightning's engineering precision and the disciplined innovation of their American counterparts, acknowledging that their defeat had been inevitable given Japan's industrial limitations. This acceptance of technological truth marked a profound cultural shift, one that reshaped Japan's military philosophy and guided its approach to defense, technology, and international relations for generations to come.